Hi, and welcome back to ManaTutor MTG Draft. We're here for a live episode today and our first week of Duskmourn. And we're going to be going over kind of our predictions of what archetypes were good compared to actual results. And then we'll see that the aggro decks are the best decks performing in the first 2 days here in Duskmourn. And so we're going to go through what the best cards of those archetypes are. So in the aggro decks, we'll go over the top 6 uncommons for each archetype and the top 6 commons for each archetype. Besides that, maybe give a few takes about how things have been going so far. So, Matt, how's your first couple days of Duskmourn been drafting?
Pretty good. I've one trophy deck so far, and a couple of others that have done okay. The set's a really interesting one. So I'm eager to jump in and kind of see how we did in terms of our ratings, and then kind of jump into some of the top cards.
What kinds of decks have you been playing? Because while I like the aggro decks a lot, I personally have noticed that black has been open for me a lot. I don't think that's been the case necessarily for everybody, but I've always started outside of black, trying to avoid it, and then end up pivoting into black because I see some rare bomb or something, which I don't think is everybody's experience. So I've played a lot of black despite advising people to avoid it. Maybe so your experience might be different than mine. So
So for my first one was Rakdos, and that went 4 and 3. It was kind of a weird Rakdos, though. It wasn't aggro and it wasn't control. It was kind of more of a mid range. I followed that up with a Selesnya. It was kind of the standard white green. That one didn't really come together as well as I'd hoped. I was trying to be aggro with survival and just get in there quick. Didn't work as well as I'd hoped. And then I tried to do the Azorius white blue tempo, which also didn't work as great as I'd hoped. But then I kind of hit the numbers with a red green recently, and that's the one I trophied with, right? And spoiler, I think I said in our preview that I didn't think that Delirium was going to work out very well. Well, Delirium did in fact work out pretty well. I do still have some thoughts on that, and we can go over them when we get to the individual cards. But yeah, it's gone pretty good. How about you?
Yeah, I've done all sorts of different archetypes. The only one I've done twice now has been Sacrifice. I find it fun. It performed decently well. I think I was around. The latest one was 4 and 3, which is okay. And then I think I had another 4 and 3 with it. So it is one of the mid tier to lower tier kind of decks. I had a pretty good Reanimator, Orzhov Reanimator deck that was fun to do. Found a lot of interesting stuff there with the I forget, I don't memorize all the names, but the card that's a raised dead for a black, or the other side of the room is whenever you remove a permanent from your graveyard, it makes a 2/2. Mm-hmm. Well, I drafted 3 of those, and anytime I got my second one out, it was always a raised dead, create 2 2/2s. And then in the future, every single other reanimation card that I had
created a bunch of 2/2s.
Yeah. So that was kind of fun. My favorite archetype I've played so far was probably, in performance wise, was probably Gruul as well. Yeah. But I think a lot of people share that. I don't know. There was I did some Golgari as well. Got to splash around a little bit. Haven't done rooms myself yet. Have faced a lot of rooms decks, and while they aren't performing that great, unfortunately, they did perform pretty well against me.
Right. I have been wrecked by a few rooms decks as well, and the only one that I think I have drafted any rooms in, or at least played any rooms in, was my Azorius deck, and it didn't go so well for me. But not to say that it won't go so well. And I think we're about to see, Azorius is currently the top performing archetype. So it must be working for some people.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of different versions of rooms, actually. I mean, mostly blue-red, and I do think a lot of people are trying to build rooms because it's the new interesting mechanic, right? People want to try it out, and so the aggro decks are performing especially well going under those, because rooms,
they're definitely mid-range, at best.
I'd even say more towards the control end, and so the aggro decks can go under rooms. But I also have seen some versions of rooms that are, I guess, maybe even more control. I faced a 5-color rooms yesterday that beat me. It was against my Orzhov deck, so like they were the slowest of the decks. And usually, when you have like a Orzhov slow versus a even slower deck, the slower deck that can draw more cards eventually wins. But so if I had gone aggro, I imagine it might have been a different story. Right. But yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting set, and it's been a highly synergistic set, this one. So compared to Bloomburrow, where we thought people said synergy and all that, and obviously every set does have some synergy, but really Bloomburrow felt more like just draft the powerful cards and hope they work together a bit. This one, while you're drafting, you really need to think about the graveyard, like what cards are getting in there for Delirium, and what cards are getting there to reanimate, or all these different things. Your synergies with Eerie and using the rooms. And so we'll be going over a lot of that, I think, as we go through the cards.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Do you want to get into our pre-release thoughts of archetypes versus the actual results?
Yeah, definitely. Let's see how badly we called this.
So on the left-hand side, we have our pre-release rankings. We gave every card in the set a grade and then put into what archetype every card could go into, in our opinion. And with those grades, mapped it over to a number to represent like A's were like 10s and D's, I think, were ones. Or D pluses were ones. Anyway, that's how we did it. So everything here is kind of between, say, like a C and a C plus, I think, in terms of overall rankings. And this was using just the commons and uncommons. And so doing that, we got a rough idea of an order of power on archetypes. And we're comparing that to the actual results for win rate. This is game in hand win rate on the right-hand side after day 2 of play. And in between, we just have a mapping of the archetype on the left to the right to show basically how things swapped. The higher the slope, the more wrong we were, right? It's kind of what that shows. So overall, I'd say we did pretty good in terms of the aggro decks, right? So Azorius and Gruul, we got pretty close to right. I do think Boros is probably our biggest miss.
Right.
Although when we said it was low, I think we also did say it might come out swinging pretty well to begin with and then die off like Boros always does. So, we'll see if that continues for the rest of the set.
Yeah, I think it's gonna drop off as people just start drafting Pyroclast. Right. I mean, that's just gonna wipe their board. So
there's sort of a middle tier here that we also got pretty good in Rakdos, Golgari, and Selesnya. And then there is a final tier of Is It Dimir Orzhov that we also
we called the ranges okay.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of these are going to be among the top performers, these are going to be among the middle performers, these are going to be among the bottom performers.
Yeah.
But obviously even within that, grading's subjective. So
exactly.
We can't, or not going to get it perfect. But I think we did okay.
So with that, we're going to walk through the different aggro archetypes, since those were the ones that were highest performing to start. And then I think in a different episode, we may go over how to get into the control decks. But clearly right now, if you can, going aggro is the best way to win right now in the format.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So the first highest performing uncommon we have, I actually wonder if this is the highest performing uncommon in the whole set. I haven't taken a look at that, but
it might be.
It could be. Sheltered by Ghosts. It does so much for what you need. It clears the board as you're trying to tempo out your opponent. It adds a little bit of power. It gives you the ward so that you don't get 2-for-1 down a removal spell without it being expensive. And it just does a lot for 2 mana.
Yeah. I think it's. I mean, I've gotten completely hosed by this card a couple of times. The one thing I will say is it doesn't give the enchantment ward, which is important to note because there's a lot of removal that targets enchantments here. So if you're playing against this, one thing to note is it may just, if you can't kill the creature, you can maybe kill the enchantment and still get your permanent back, and get rid of their lifelink and +1/+0 and all the bonuses that it gives. But it is just an amazingly efficient card, right? In terms of what it gives you, it protects the creature that it's on. It gives a benefit and all that for 2 mana. Yeah. Plus it triggers Eerie, right? Yeah. Like it works so well synergistically with the archetype that I would not be surprised if this is not the top uncommon in the entire set.
Yeah, that's one thing I wondered. So this archetype really is very eerie centric, and you'll notice a very common theme. Like all the best commons and uncommons, like either trigger eerie, like have eerie on them, or come in as triggering eerie. And I will say, Sheltered by Ghosts, I do think you want to be careful when you play this. I think you want to play this as somewhat of your last card, or near there, because you want to bait them out of any removal that they have,
right?
Whether for your creature or for removal for Sheltered by Ghosts, before you play it. So there is that to think about. But strong card.
and I do think that because this archetype relies so much on enchantment creatures, right? That you may well bait them out of their enchantment removal early, because they might use it on a Fear of Isolation, or they might use it on another enchantment creature, and then they may have creature removal but not be able to afford it, the Ward 2. And, you can, in fact, play it a little bit without having to worry too much. I mean, obviously, if you're not playing against green, you have a little bit more, leeway with it, because green is the one with the most enchantment removal. But yeah, it's excellent.
In second, we have Optimistic Scavenger, just a good cheap creature that loves eerie triggers.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is, not maybe one I would have projected being one of the top uncommons, but if you can reliably trigger eerie, I think in fact with some of the cards that are going to come up later, we can talk about how all this combos. But if you look at like Fear of Isolation, right, you can put that out, and then all of a sudden you get you have a 3/4 flyer on turn 2 potentially. Like you probably have to bounce a land, but that's not
This goes really well with one of the good commons. We'll see the Room that comes into play with a 1/1 Glimmer that triggers 2 +1/+1 counters on turn 2 on this, making a 3/3. And then what if you Fear of Isolation that, and then can do it again type of thing? This runs away pretty quickly, and I think that's what's making it the second best uncommon. We also have Fear of Isolation, like we mentioned, which a powerful 2 mana spell, 2/3 for flying for 2, but it is that combination with picking up rooms and enchantments like that, I think really helps.
Right. Yeah. And I mean the thing, and I don't think I fully appreciated this, and when we were kind of at like reviewing the set, is all of the rooms are essentially ETB triggers, right? Like they're you can think about them like creatures with ETB triggers, and Fear of Isolation just gets you another crack at that, right? Now, you don't always want to pick up a room that you've invested 6 mana into, but you may want to, right? So, and I think that's what makes Fear of Isolation such a good card, in addition to its good rate and its stats, is that it gives you that option and flexibility to, whether you get it early game and you're just picking up a land to get an early play, that's probably the worst case scenario for it. And the best case scenario is, you're picking up a room that you really do want to play again to trigger all sorts of eerie effects, right? And it itself triggers eerie because it's an enchantment creature.
Right. And a lot of the rooms that are good for this archetype are pretty cheap to begin with, so picking it up is fine. And then you want to replay for the enters ability along with the trigger. And all those cards also say, draw another card on the other side of the room that also triggers eerie when you activate it as well. So this really can trigger a lot of eerie triggers. Fourth, we have Unnerving Grasp, just an efficient, Mana War is a good card. Manifest Dread that bounces something. Just one of the most efficient cards in the set. Right.
Yeah. And in this set, it's obviously, since we just talked about it, even more flexible. You can use it to bounce that room, get another eerie trigger out of it, and Manifest Dread. So it's not like you're just bouncing you're not spending 3 mana to bounce your own thing and not getting anything out of it. Right now, you're probably still going to use this more on your opponent than you are on yourself. But the fact that it has that flexibility just makes it more useful in your deck.
For sure. And then we have more eerie payoffs in Gremlin Tamer. The 2/2 eerie, when it enters, create a 1/1 gremlin. Just a very powerful card, and its rate.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's funny because it has you create a 1/1 red gremlin and not a 1/1 glimmer. I have a feeling that like the original version of this card was like every eerie every time. But I guess you couldn't do it that way, because then it would be self-reinforcing, right? Like it would just create infinite. So they had to be like, well, what can we make it do? And we'll make it create gremlins. But it's still, I mean, it's still great, right? Getting a 1/1 every time you play an enchantment, and your deck is, I would say, except for sorceries and instants, basically everything you're going to play is almost an enchantment in some form or an enchantment creature.
And then we got a powerful enchantment that's a bit risky, but a 1-drop enchantment, that Eerie Trigger and Ethereal Armor. And we've talked enough about how many different enchantments there are in Trigger and Eerie, so you're going to have a lot of them. So Ethereal Armor in this deck is usually a +3/+3 or more.
Right. Yeah. And I liked this card to begin with. I think we talked about this card in our previous video where we discussed some of the biggest differences in our grades, and I was really high on this. I remain really high on this card. I think this set has enough enchantments that this card certainly has enough support in Azorius. I think it also has enough support in Selesnya. Some of the other archetypes, maybe not. I'm not sure you play this in Boros. I'm not sure you play this in Orzhov. But Orzhov maybe, depending. You kind of have to see, but certainly in Azorius, this card is amazing. Yeah, you do run the risk of getting 2 for 1, but if you're tactical about how you play it, you have a lot of flying creatures, so this can potentially just end the game, for 1 mana. Someone's not expecting it, they don't save removal or whatever. You play this, you get +5/+5, +6/+6 in the air, and then the game's over, right? I've had that happen to me, so...
Yeah, I'm still skeptical on this card outside of Azorius. I mean, Azorius is the clear place where this should perform well, and it does, even a little bit better than I expected. But I haven't checked the stats on the other archetypes, but I imagine they're not anywhere near what it is
absolutely.
for this.
Yeah, it's not going to be as good in those, but I think there's still a home for it in certain ones. There's a lot of enchantment creatures in green, and so I could see it. Like I said, I can see it in Selesnya. Plus you want your survivors, right? And then this just helps you survive, right? So, but yeah, I mean, it's clearly a great card. So
for the commons, we have Trapped in the Screen, fairly self-explanatory. We said this card was good from the onset.
Right.
It does exactly what you want. Eerie Trigger and clears the way for your tempo strategy.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's good, and this one's good in every deck.
Yeah. This is the best white removal card, right? Yeah. And these, in every set, there's one of these, usually costs 3. It's exile. This one has the benefit of having ward, which most don't. So this is actually better in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say, and it's a good card. And if you're playing white, take it.
It's interesting. This kind of card is not good in every set, though. Like, it wasn't so great in Bloomburrow, but this is a better version, and this set cares about enchantment, so this being an enchantment really helps.
Yep.
In second, we have Glimmerburst. For all the same reasons we said, I mean, you want to draw more enchantments to be able to play, and while you're doing that, creating a 1/1 Glimmer enchantment creature at instant speed, pretty nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we normally see the pay 3 to draw 2, and I think we covered this card in our preview, but you normally see the pay 3 to draw 2, sometimes at instant speed, sometimes at sorcery speed. But adding an additional mana to get the 1/1 just makes this super useful in this deck. And I would argue this is okay in other archetypes as well, but obviously it really shines here.
Yeah. And then this one was a surprise to me. Don't get me wrong, I thought the card was reasonable. I never like leaving an opponent a creature. So Unable to Scream does Eerie triggers for 1 mana. I didn't love, again, this is tempo where you're mainly getting out your creatures, your smaller creatures early, and then clearing the way from them and preventing your opponent from that point. And so this does leave behind a blocker, which I didn't like, but it's performing quite well. And I do think this is the home for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons obviously it's an enchantment, so it's going to perform well in an Eerie focused archetype. However, I think one of the reasons it performs particularly well here is you don't necessarily care about them having blockers because you have flyers a lot of the time. And so if you have the flyers and you can just go over the top, it's less important if they have a blocker. You just don't want them to be able to swing at you, which this does. The other thing I would say about this is, the losing all abilities is super important, right? There are so many creatures that have either ETB trigger, well, not ETB triggers, but they trigger when something enters into the battlefield, like Eerie triggers, or, the ability to sacrifice things if you're playing against black-red, where they're trying to get their sacrifice engine going. The fact that you can just shut that down for 1 mana and trigger Eerie you know, sure, it's great that they, they do get to keep the creature, and that's a little bit of a downside of it. But this card is just, I think, really good in this.
Yeah, that's a good point. These kind of spells do not work well when there is a sacrifice theme usually, but with this saying that loses the abilities, if you put it on their sacrifice engine, it shuts it down still. So I think that's a big point towards this being a good card. In 4th and 5th, we have Grand Entryway, Elegant Rotunda. This is the 2-mana spell that we already talked about.
Yep.
This one is also a great one to bounce after you've paid off both of the things, get it back, and then do it again twice, So it has a lot of synergy there. And then we have Underwater Tunnel, Slimy Aquarium. This one kind of surprises me. Surveil 2 is kind of like drawing a card in some way, and it has synergies of getting things to the graveyard. But this archetype doesn't really care about that graveyard as much. And then with Slimy Aquarium, it's decent, but it's a little bit understated. So it does kind of surprise me, but I do think this is, again, the eerie triggers is really why this works, is setting yourself up for good plays. It's important in tempo decks, so Surveil 2 helps fuel that, and then you can get multiple eerie triggers.
Yeah. I'm also a little surprised on this, and I wonder if maybe it'll come down a little bit over the course of the set as kind of other things come up, because I do think there are better rooms, even at common potentially for these. But we'll just kind of have to see. But you're right, this does do the job. The Manifesting Dread is interesting because we'll talk about Manifest Dread, I think, when we get into some of the other archetypes, but it can be very lethal, right? If you've got enough face down creatures and your opponent doesn't know which ones to block because some are lands and some are actual creatures, you can run away with a game that way.
And then last, number 6 in commons, we have Glimmerlight. Same thing we've been saying. It creates a creature, it's cheap, and it triggers all your eerie.
Yeah, and I think this is another one that I think is going to come down as the set goes on, right? Paying 2 for a 1/1 and then having to pay again to equip it, right? It would be one thing if you got to create a 1/1 and it immediately equipped for free the first time. I think that would be pretty decent, because then you're getting a 2/2 for 2 and triggering eerie. But I'm not sure I like this so much otherwise, and I'm still not sure that I would play it, but I guess the stats so far at least tell me otherwise.
I somewhat like this card because I think it's a better version of Short Sword because it comes with its own creature, but I do agree with you. It's that extra mana to get to where you get a 2/2, it's essentially 3 mana for the 2/2, that is expensive still for a deck that wants to be going fast and everything. So, or be cheap to be able to get out as many things as quickly as possible in tempo. So it does surprise me a little bit. I can see it coming down, but I'm less surprised about this than I was the previous card.
So next up, we have Boros. This is currently the number 2 performer, as we kind of showed a couple slides ago. And the first 2 cards on it, we're not going to cover them again, I think. A little bit surprising, I guess, in a little ways, because these are certainly different. But I mean, I guess I'm not so surprised by Sheltered by Ghosts, just because it's such a good card in removal. Giving something lifelink and ward is good. Optimistic Scavenger, a little bit surprised, because you're probably playing less rooms. You're triggering eerie a little bit less. But I guess, a 1/1 for 1 is a 1/1 for 1 when you're trying to play out quick and affect the board. And so, maybe that can, have some value. But I think this one I'm almost positive Optimistic Scavenger will come down in Boros as an uncommon, but as the set goes on. But I think right now people are kind of looking at it, and maybe people are picking these early before they know what colors they're going in, and these just happen to make the deck, but I guess we'll see how that goes.
I think there's a little bit of the fact that this is obviously good on 1 as a 1-mana 1/1 that will grow over time.
Yeah.
But there's enough enchantments out there that even mid-game, this can grow to be a reasonable creature. So I think that's part of what's causing this as well. So I think it may come down a little bit, but I still think this will be one of the top 6 uncommons for Boros personally.
Probably, yeah. But I think things certainly like the next card, right? Midnight Mayhem. Midnight Mayhem is all about Boros. It's one of the signpost uncommons, so to speak, for the archetype. So being able to throw out 3/1/1s, giving them menace, lifelink haste, for 4 mana. I mean, it's you're paying a little bit, but the fact that you can swing pretty significantly with those, along with the rest of your board. Get a little bit of life out of that. You know, so you might insulate yourself against a crackback. You know, I think I'm not surprised at all to see this as like the number 3 uncommon.
See, I am a little bit surprised just because it's an underwhelming rate, right? Like you get the 3/1/1s for 4. I mean, you know, basically 3/3 worth of stats overall for 4.
Right.
Now it is across 3 creatures, which is, you know, pretty nice. But it really is, I think, the synergies with everything else going on that make this.
Right. I was going to say, you've got so many things that trigger whenever a creature 1 or less enters the battle, or 2 or less enters the battlefield, 2 or less attacks. You know, so I think when you combo that with all of the other synergies, I'm not surprised to see this that high.
Yep, that makes sense. And I think we're going to see one of those combos pretty quickly here.
Right. Yes. So we have Arabella, Abandoned Doll, right? Little bit understated on the power, but whenever it attacks, it deals, you know, X damage and you gain X life, right? Obviously with the number. So right there, you know, if you turn 4, if you've got this and 1 other creature out, and, you know, you create 3/3 goblin or 3/1/1 goblins on turn 4, right? And swing, you know, that's 5 damage and you're gaining 5 life. I mean, it's pretty easy to see how that just gets a little out of control really quickly. And then, so you have next up Split Skin Doll. This one I'm a little bit surprised on because you know, I think there are 2 good 2/2s for 2. I guess this kind of helps fix your draw a little bit. You may already have another creature out, in which case just draw another card. But if you miss your turn 1 play, this is significantly less appealing to me, but I can understand why it's still in there.
I'm not surprised because I just love these creatures. I love these 2 mana things for a couple of reasons. 2 mana, even Rummage is reasonable in my mind, not as like an uncommon, very powerful card. That's not what makes this as powerful as it is. But I like those as hand smoothers. And all these 2 mana, like draw another cards are just it's powerful, right? That's a lot for 2 mana. So the fact that you get a 2/1, a reasonable creature, and you can draw a card, you're right. It's this isn't something usually I want to play on turn 2. This is for later, but you can reliably draw another card, and that's pretty powerful.
Right. And if you're flooded for land in your opening hand, this gives you an option to get out of that, right? So there's a way to, even if you don't have a turn 1 play, you know, if you've got 4 lands in hand and you don't really, and you draw a 5th on your second turn or whatever, you know, like that gives you the option to, you know, smooth it out a little bit. So yeah. Last up, we have Razorkin Horde Caller, which, you know, probably is one of the top end cards in terms of, you know, mana cost for Boros, I would think, just given the, you know, the aggro nature of the deck, but it's, you know, a fantastic one, right? 4/4 haste, a little bit understated at costing 5, but whenever you attack, creating a 1/1 is amazing. You know, I would note that you get to order your triggers. So like, you know, if you have Arabella, for example, you can create the 1/1 before Arabella triggers. And so like that's just an additional damage in life. So not surprising at all that this is just going to grow your board every time you attack with it. And so moving on to the commons, we have Turn Inside Out. You know, not surprised to see this at the top of the list. It's, you know, combat tricks can be hit or miss a little bit, but this one is good, right? In the sense that you're probably killing a creature with it or potentially ending the game. And then, you know, if you end up trading into the creature, you still get a 2/2 out of that. And so you win that trade effectively.
I do think that this kind of ability to reach to kill bigger creatures is big for red-white, right?
Absolutely.
That was what made us think early on that if you're having a bunch of creatures power 2 or less, you're going to run out of steam, right? And that's what made us put Boros lower down. It's these kind of cards, though, that bring you out of that let you attack through into bigger creatures.
Right, and you get a 2/2, which is great because you care about power less than 2, and the fact that it's an instant means you can play it and buff your creature after you've gotten the, you know, the trigger, the attack trigger, right? Or, you know, that for power 2 or less. So this is just basically made for this, and it's excellent. And then next up, we have Trapped in the Screen again, right? As we said before, still excellent. Great to be able to slow your opponent down. You know, I would argue that, you know, I'm not surprised to see this here, but it's one of those things that I'm not sure it's always worth playing, because usually you're trying to get in before your opponent gets anything on the board that you need. I think you definitely want to play it in your deck, right? But I'm not sure about like the trade-off always of casting this versus casting something else in your hand that might assist with just killing your opponent, given that you are just trying to be fast. But if the game does drag out, this is one of those things that can really save you.
I see this really as the same type of slot filler as Turn Inside Out, in that this gets the big blocker out of the way, right? You've got to be able to handle the big creatures and tack through, and that it does that.
Yep. And then we also have Scorching Dragonfire here, which, you know, this is, I think, pretty self-explanatory. There's basically one of these in every set. 3 damage, 2 mana, instant speed, gets the blocker out of the way, exiles it if you kill it. You know, another way to potentially do this, right, is attacking in, doing some damage, killing it after the fact if you can't quite kill it because it's got a little bit more toughness. So there's a lot of ways to use the card, and it's obvious it's good in all red decks, but it's particularly good here. And then we have Jump Scare, which, you know, combat trick to give something flying, makes it a horror. I don't know that note that it's not gonna trigger Eerie because the creature's already on the battlefield. So I'm not sure that making it a horror enchantment creature really matters. But +2/2 and flying for 1 mana. Again, kind of the same thing we said with Turn Inside Out. It's a decent combat trick. You know, this one also just gives you that little bit of evasion, in that even if you can't, if you're in a stalled board state, you can swing over your opponent and potentially knock them out. Like playing this on your Arabella could potentially get you, you know, 4 or 5 extra damage, right, in terms of her attack. So, Glassworks Shattered Yard. 4 damage for 3 mana, sorcery speed, and then 1 damage at the end of each turn. This is the primary value I see in this, and tell me if you think different, is this helps with your stalled board states.
Yeah. Same as all the other commons that we've run through so far, really. Like, clearing the way is very important for red-white. It almost doesn't matter as much what cheap creatures you have. It does, you know, there's some other evasion things like menace creatures that too, there, you know, things like that, all useful, but you need to clear the board, and that's how all these commons are doing that.
Right, yeah, and that's the Glassworks side, but I also think Shattered Yard can be beneficial, right?
Especially in this archetype.
If you're stuck in a stalled board state, you know, it can slowly ping your opponent, right? And if you get if you get them down to 5 life, it's not inconceivable that it could kill you. And then last up in common for Boros, we have Friendly Ghost, 2/4, 4 mana. It basically gives itself its power and toughness to, you know, whatever you cap, or whatever you want when it enters the battlefield. And this is another one of those, you know, just helping you power through, right? I'd say this is, you know, I think when we talked about this card, we talked about this as a survivor card in green-white, because you want, like, this helps your creature survive the combat. But I think it's equally good in Boros here, in terms of you're obviously playing, you know, lower power, lower toughness creatures. So the odds that one of those could just get killed and you don't want that is higher. I'd say the thing I don't like about this is that you have to play it before any combat triggers. And so you kind of lose, you know, one of your power 2 or less creatures temporarily when you play this.
I mean, but you can find a target that's good for it, and it's worth the price. I am a little bit surprised by this one, but I don't know why, because not every set, Bloomburrow had the same type of concept of the +X creature that came on out, the frog that it was a duo though. That had +X and vigilance to a creature that allowed you to attack through it, and that one ended up being good. And I remember in like our post analysis of the set, I'm like, keep on the lookout for these kind of cards. They're good to combine them into a creature. And so I should have known. And I think I even mentioned that in the early set review. Like, but I think I also said, but it's not quite that creature because it doesn't give vigilance. I like the other one better. And I do think all of that is true. It's just when I said all that, I still kind of expected it to not be I guess it's only the 6th best common of this archetype, so maybe, you know. But
I do think this one may go down, because there are a lot of good commons. You know, in this, I'm actually surprised not to see Clockwork Percussionist in the top 6 here, because Clockwork Percussionist has been performing pretty well overall as a 1/1 haste for 1 that essentially lets you draw a card when it dies. And so I am a little bit surprised to not see that among the top commons here. So I think there's odds that this one might go down a little bit depending on how others perform.
Yeah, I kind of wonder.
All right, so we did a quick look real quick, and it is actually the Clockwork Percussionist is the 7th best common. So I would not be surprised to see some trades going on there, because it's certainly an honorable mention at the very least.
Third on the list of the archetypes in aggro, we have Gruul, with Under the Skin being the top performing uncommon. Not surprising. It's just a very powerful 3-drop. You get a 2-for-1. Just very efficient.
Yeah, and one of the things that I would note for this is, and I didn't appreciate until I recently played this card, you know, it's good early because it's essentially get a 2/2, draw a card, but it's also good late to return something that they've already killed, right? Or that you've already lost. And, you know, that ability, you know, I think I use this, I played this to get the 2/2, and then I returned a, what is it? The 5/4 that manifests dread when it dies. 5/4 for 5 that I forget.
Bashful Beastie.
Bashful Beastie, right? And so Bashful Beastie died. I got a 2/2 from that. Next turn, I played Under the Skin. I got a 2/2. I got the Bashful Beastie back. And then, you know, I didn't have quite enough mana to play the Bashful Beastie, but then the following turn I played it. That's just incredible value out of 2 cards in your deck. That's like 4 creatures at that point. And, you know, yeah, you pay a lot of mana to do it, but getting squares on the board is important. And I think that that absolutely does it for you.
In second, we have Betrayer's Bargain. Just an efficient removal spell, especially if you have something you can sacrifice. It's flexible, you know. I do think you more often than not don't want to be sacrificing something in this particular deck. But, you know, if you're 3 towards Delirium and you just need your 4th, you can really select which one you want to sacrifice. This helps you get there.
And I absolutely did this. You know, in the Gruul deck that I played, I sacrificed a Clockwork Percussionist. Right. So not only did I get to kill their creature, I got to exile a card and play it, right, as a result of that. So, you know, and I got 2 towards Delirium because it's a artifact creature, right? So, you know, it is absolutely really powerful. And you can do the fact that you can do this at instant speed, potentially trigger your Delirium, and then like on combat things that might apply, like a creature getting a +1/+1 if you have Delirium. Not everybody's going to see that kind of thing coming, and it's a great way to surprise your opponent to, you know, remove a blocker, you know, make some of your other creatures more powerful potentially if Delirium triggers. I mean, because you also get this in graveyard, right? So sacrificing Clockwork Percussionist to this, that's already 3 of 4 on Delirium. So talking about Delirium, you know, it really relies on these types of combos to get those things in your graveyard, and, you know, Betrayer's Bargain just helps with that. Plus, even if you pay 4 to do 5 at instant speed, it's not bad.
In third, we have Wildfire Wickerfolk, an efficient, you know, signpost uncommon, does everything that this deck wants to do, and is an artifact creature at that. So you don't even really care if this dies that much.
Absolutely, and that's exactly how I played it. You know, I got one of these in my Gruul deck, and every time I had it, I got to play this turn 2 a number of times. It almost always hits for damage, and then if you lose it turn 3, turn 4, usually if after I got in damage and they got a creature, I'd save it as a blocker to trade. But unless I needed the Delirium, but you know, it's still great. You know, it's efficient, and if you can get Delirium early, sometimes this will survive, and you know, the trample can help at 4 power. So
notice amongst our 3 top uncommons, we have 4 different card types.
Right. There you go.
Which says something about this archetype.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think it was well designed. And, you know, we kind of talked about this a little earlier, but with Delirium, it's really just making sure that you have that right balance. And this was probably the trickiest thing I did when I played my Gruul deck last night, was really making sure I had, you know, 3 or 4 3 sorceries, 3 instants, you know, somewhere in that range, a few artifact creatures, a couple of enchantment creatures, you know, just making sure that I had those. And then, you know, some ways to make like manifest dread to try and maybe get a land in graveyard or something that could help. just finding enough ways to get to 4 as quick as possible. And I think that that's really the key to making Delirium work really well. I think I did it pretty well in that deck, but I'd say, that as you're building one of these, that's the key thing to keep in mind.
In 4th, we have Irreverent Gremlin, 2/2 Menace. That in itself is powerful because it can get through most of the time. It's much harder to block with the Menace, but that 2 power or less ability really can filter through your deck, can get lands into your graveyard for the Delirium, and can really help you get the cards you particularly need to finish off the game.
Yeah. I don't think I played this in mine. Maybe it was because I didn't see them, or maybe didn't recognize that this would have been a really good card for it. But I'm not surprised, right? I'm not, like, for every reason you say, I think this is good. It helps get to Delirium a little bit faster. It helps, 2/2 Menace is great. And then, like, later on, this is also potentially something that, you don't mind using as a chump blocker to help trigger Delirium.
Then we have Patchwork Beastie, just a card that helps you get to Delirium and is quite good once you get there.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll note something about that I used pretty extensively in my Gruul deck with Patchwork Beastie. Just because it can't attack or block doesn't mean it's not a creature for other purposes. You can use this with all of your fight spells. You can use this. I think I had I think it's a mythic rare, Tyvar. The creature that it's a 3/3 for 3. You can tap another creature to give it indestructible. I tapped Patchwork Beastie to give it indestructible and killed an opponent's creature. I think the opponent wasn't really paying attention, but to what Tyvar's abilities were. But yeah, just because it can't attack or block doesn't mean it's useless early on. And even if you don't necessarily, it's still a great turn 1 drop. If it gets killed eventually, it's helping you get to Delirium. And later on, spending 1 mana for a 3/3 is pretty good.
And then last up, we have Fear of Burning Alive. We talked about this one being a good uncommon in the pre-release, and it just does a lot. 4/4 that deals 4 damage to the opponent. It is a good way to finish your opponent off in a lot of decks. And when you get the Delirium out of it too, boy, it swings the game completely.
Absolutely. And I use this. I think I had one in my Gruul deck, and I've seen it played against me, and it is devastating. And note, it's, anytime it's non-combat damage as well going forward. So if you have other ways to deal non-combat damage, you're just going to absolutely be blowing up their whole board.
Amongst the commons, we have Scorching Dragonfire for all the reasons that we said before, so I'm not going to go into that. Say its name. This one's a little bit surprising. I like the card, but I did not expect it. This is still a 2 mana do nothing in this a faster deck. Right. So I was a little bit surprised that that's the case, but I mean, it does really help with Delirium, and it gets you a particular card that you want out of your graveyard. So.
Right. Yeah. And I do think that's the effect, right? Obviously, what you return doesn't have to be one of the milled cards. I didn't play any of these in my Gruul deck. I'm not sure that I would have, because I think there are better cards, but I mean, the stats obviously suggest this is pretty good. I believe this is currently the winning most green common. I'm a little surprised by it, but I do think that, maybe the stats are telling us something that we may not be realizing. I mean, I think it's obviously powerful for getting to Delirium. I'm not sure I like it in some of the other archetypes, but I can see why it's very good here.
I get, yeah, Turbo Delirium is just that important, I guess. I thought you more get to Delirium naturally. That's how I've played my green red, and it seemed to work out pretty fine. Yeah. But I guess there are cases where I would have benefited more getting it out sooner, getting to Delirium sooner. So I'll definitely be trying soon in the next day or two here to play Say Its Name in my Gruul decks.
This could effectively get you Delirium on turn 2.
Yeah.
Right. If done correctly. It can help fix your draws a little bit, right? If you need a land, it gives you the option to return that. So I think there are upsides to it in this archetype, but I think what surprises me more is not that it's so good here, but that it's just overall the top winning green common right now. And because I don't see it as good in like Selesnya or one of the other archetypes, right? Like
I think it's pretty good in green black.
Could be. I don't know about Simic, but yeah, I mean, I suppose I could see options for it.
And lastly, we have Turn Inside Out, which we already talked about. Gives you the extra push through to the opponent.
Yep, not much to say. I think we covered this when we did Boros. Still good here in Gruul.
Up last on our list of commons, we have Spineseeker Centipede. This deck really hits Delirium quickly, so this becomes effectively a 3-mana, 3/3 Vigilance a lot of the time, but it helps to draw the extra land that you can use to, another resource for you to play bigger spells.
Yeah. I think I'm a little less, positive on this card in this. I still don't love it, even with Delirium, like 3/3 Vigilance for 3 and getting a land. Yeah, it's good. I'm not sure this makes the cut a lot of the time, at least, it didn't in mine. In fact, I didn't even draft one, I'm pretty sure, when I was drafting it, but it could also just be that I had a pretty good choice of cards. No one was in green or red really in the draft that I did do Gruul. So it's entirely possible that, my experience in this case was, given the limited number of times I've done it, only one, was not, typical, right? Let's say. Yeah, I can see this. I'm not sure. This sometimes might be one of those, like, it makes the cut, it doesn't make the cut cards, because it is a little understated to begin with. Getting a land, though, can help. So I don't think we should maybe underrate this, to speak.
Yeah, I think this was one of the cards that we had on our disagree list, before.
Yeah.
I like this card.
Yeah,
I do like this more in black-green, where you want to be splashing a bit more, I think, than in green-red. Green-red, you can splash, but it really depends on the exact build. But I think this is more about the fact that this can get to Delirium, making it better than a 2/1, and it gets you an extra land to play spells like later on this list, Impossible Inferno, for example. Decent card. And then in 5th, we have Manifest Dread, just a good 2-drop. You get your 2/2, helps fuel you towards Delirium with the Manifest Dread.
Yep, absolutely. And I played this in my Gruul deck, and it's funny because sometimes you will actively be looking, like I had 2 options, right? I think when I played this one time on turn 2, one was a Clockwork Percussionist, the other was a land. I put the Clockwork Percussionist in the graveyard and put the land on the battlefield, because I was like, there's no way I'm ever going to pay to turn Clockwork Percussionist faced up in most circumstances just to get that exile. But it being in my graveyard means I'm 2 towards Delirium, and I've got a chump blocker that I can trade at some point to get a land in graveyard. So I was actually fine with that as a choice. I don't know that's kind of a niche case for it, but I think it's one of those things. It's going to enable you to get to Delirium, and that's what you should be thinking of with this card.
And last up, we have Impossible Inferno, which is not a great card until you hit Delirium.
Right.
Then it becomes quite good, because 6 damage kills almost everything in the set.
Yep.
And then Delirium gets you an extra card on top of that. So powerful in this deck.
Yeah, and I would say, obviously you're not going to sit on this until you have Delirium if you have to play it. And so it's fine. It's serviceable as a very big, kill spell when you need it, whether you have Delirium or not. Yep. Delirium is just like the little bit of icing on the cake. I would probably take this as a not high pick, but in almost any red deck, I might take this as a pick because it's a good card in terms of being able to deal with big threats, which red can sometimes struggle with. So, but here obviously is where it shines the most.
So today we talked all about the aggro decks and went through how to do those. That doesn't mean that's the only way to work with this set, though. There is some promise to the slower, even control decks as well. And so what we're showing here is amongst top players, whether they splash in this archetype or not, this is the win rate, right? So this is 2 colors plus 2 colors plus splash. Take that archetype, take the games played and the games won, and divide that as the win rate. So Boros is actually number 1 amongst top players, then Azorius. But then in 3rd, you've got a more grindier deck in Golgari. So I think it's pretty promising to say that Golgari can win quite a bit. You still have Gruul next, but you're starting to see decks like Dimir comes up next, which is more controlling, Selesnya more controlling. Those kind of decks are higher in win rate amongst the top players compared to aggro, which I guess always happens, but it's worth mentioning that I think people are going to slowly try to get all the different aggro cards that we've mentioned in this so far. And when that happens, other opportunities open up.
Yeah.
And I do think you'll want to be looking out for like Golgari and splashing some. Dimir, I'm a little less thinking so, and that's why I put the games on the right-hand side here. While Dimir is winning 5th most, almost nobody plays it.
Splashed it.
Yeah, nobody's played it really. Like it's 268 games, and Orzhov, the next highest, is almost double that in play.
Yes.
So what that's telling me is Dimir can win when you have specific cards that pivot you into that. Yeah. So don't look for it often, but if you get basically some big bomb, then
you can get to it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. And the thing I'll add about splashing, right? There are a lot of splashing enablers in this set, right? You've got a number of lands at common. You've got Terramorphic Expanse. You've got all the 2-color lands that enter tapped unless your opponent has 13 or less life, right? Which are sort of a new take on those. And they're relatively easy to get. And so, as you're seeing, and they go late, right? I've seen a lot of these make it to pick 10, pick 11, in pack 1 because no one knows that they're going to need them. So, there are opportunities there to think about what you have. And, hey, if you get that big bomb, do you need to play, if it's a multicolored bomb, do you need to play those 2 colors? Or if it only has 1 mana pip of, say, black, do you need to play black primarily? Or can you splash that bomb, with one of these 2 lands? And so keeping yourself open, as always. It was a little harder to do in Bloomburrow because there wasn't as many enablers for that. Here, I think there's enough support. And like things that we covered, like Spineseeker Centipede. If you're in green, there's obviously options, to get lands. I think there's some other ones too. I think Keys to the House also gets you lands. And so that's, an easy artifact that can go in any deck and isn't totally useless. So I think there's a number of options, right? So keeping yourself open, looking for those opportunities to maybe, hey, take that great bomb that you got. And even if you don't play that as one of your primary colors, you might be able to fit it in.
I'm always willing to pick a splashable bomb early. Like, as they say, don't take multicolor cards early. You can take splashable multicolor cards early because it's not leaving you only to one particular archetype. Right. It's actually, when you count it out, I think it's like 7 different archetypes, different possibilities if you count being able to splash. So stay open to those. In fact, I do think Izzet does want to splash a lot, but I will say this, I am kind of avoiding Izzet and Orzhov for now because that nearly like 3 percentage point win rate drop, even amongst top players there. Yeah. That's sort of where I'm trying to avoid. I did play Orzhov and I had a good 5-3 deck with it. Like it can come together. But until that pivot from the aggro decks to the control, like everyone's taking aggro and that evens out, I do think that these lower decks, controlling decks, will come up in win rate. Yeah. And there will be a season in a few weeks where it really makes sense to pivot into drafting those. And I think that's why we'll wait to talk about those until that pivot happens. But those might be some of our upcoming episodes.
Yep. I just want to add one thing to your idea on multicolor bombs that are splashable. There are a few 3-colored multicolor cards, and those are less splashable, right? Because those you still have some options. Like, let's say it's black, green, red. You have the option to do like black, red, green, red with a splash, but it limits you much more. And so I'm wary of taking like any 3-color bomb as like an early pick. But however, if I know I'm going to be in green, red, and there's a green, red, black bomb that comes later on in pack 2 or pack 3, yeah, I'll probably take it if it fits in the deck, and I think it'll do a good job.
Yep.
So that was our initial look, week 1, at how things are going in Duskmourn. And so obviously, we're still playing. We're still learning a lot about this set. Everybody's learning a lot about this set. Archetypes are going to evolve a little bit. The meta is going to evolve a little bit. And so we're hoping to come back next week to maybe hit on some of the archetypes that we didn't hit on today, talk a little bit more about sort of what we're seeing in some of the cards and some of the combos and things that people are pulling off or that we may have played or played against us. And so next week, I think we're going to just dive a little bit deeper into it and let us know if there's something you'd like us to cover in the next episode. And as always, please like and subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next one.
See you there.